What's a Samsung Gam Boy? A lot of you will be thinking this looks a lot like a Sega Master System, and you'd be spot on. The reason for this is that Sega is a Japanese company. Japan and Korea have not always had a smooth relationship. So up until 1998, there was a boycott which meant that Japanese companies couldn't sell straight into South Korea. To get around that, Japanese companies could partner up with a South Korean company to make a localized version to sell in South Korea. For the most part, it's functionally the same as the Japanese version of the Master System. It has the Japanese-sized cartridge slot, which is smaller than the international version. This means it's compatible with all Japanese Master System, Sega Mark III, and Sega SG-1000 games. It also has the Sega card slot on the front. For a while, Sega would release budget titles on a card instead of a cartridge, just to make them a bit cheaper, but this idea was deleted later on. And 3D glasses input. They must have had big plans for that, but they only ever released 8 games that supported them. Back then, Sega controllers only had 2 buttons and a D-pad, so you couldn't pause with the controller. You had to have a pause button on the console. The most unique thing about this system, though, is the controller it came with. Samsung's design for the controller actually predates the Gam Boy. You can see it here made for their SPC line of computers. This wouldn't have been allowed in a lot of other countries because of the kind of D-pad that it has. Nintendo filed a patent for this in the mid-80s. They never would have let Sega use it. It seems like that patent was never filed in Korea, so this controller actually got a good D-pad. Mine's the wrong color because it's from a Gam Boy 2, but it's the same controller with a different sticker. Here's the controller the rest of the world got. It's got pointy corners, the mushiest buttons and nastiest D-pad. The Samsung controller is a lot smaller, so I can imagine that being a problem for some people. But the buttons and D-pad actually feel quite nice. I really prefer this controller. However, I've never used it. Ever since I've had it, the connector's been missing. Now, I normally don't take things apart until the end of the video, but this is going to stop me from showing it to you, so let's have a look in here now. On the back, we've got unintelligible English letters. Oh, actually, that's brown, burn, vertically down, what for white, black, green, blue, ore for orange, I guess. The only problem being that these wire colors don't match that. On the front, we have a factory damaged wire. Isn't that nice? That was crimped into there. We have JK210, which might be the model number, although it's different to the SCP-100 on the back of the case. And we've got Samsung, Korea. I didn't know that Samsung was 2 words in Korean. Master System controllers are very simple. There is no electronics or anything, so it's very easy to figure out how they're wired. I've mapped out all the wiring. I've taken the cable from an aftermarket Mega Drive controller, soldered it all together. Does it work? Yeah, we're working. The controller is very small, but it feels quite nice to hold other than my fingers being bunched up on the back. So this thing has a lot in common with the Japanese version of the Master System. So basically it's kind of a Japanese Master System in a fancy case, right? Well, it's actually worse. The Japanese Master System had a thing called an FM sound chip. It means it improved the sound over the Sega Mark III and what we got as the Master System, so it can make more sounds to create better songs, that sort of stuff. This doesn't have that. So this is the only system that has this BIOS screen with the Space Harrier music without FM sound. Time to see what's inside. We've got an internal power supply with a hardwired power cable which plugs straight into the wall. It steps down the voltage from mains AC to low voltage DC. This is really strange for a Master System. Every other country had all this stuff inside a brick that you plug straight into the wall and a big empty space inside the console. I'm pretty sure this is because Korea was midway through transitioning from 100 volt to 220 volts. Through a little window on the back here, there's a switch to change from 110 volt to 220 volt. This is so you could select what mains voltage you were running. Also on the bottom here, we have a label with every Samsung service center from 1989, a couple of Samsung logos in Korean, and made in Korea, which is a big deal because Segas weren't made in Korea, only the Korean market ones were. Inside we've got a Z80 CPU. The Z80 CPU is probably one of the most used CPUs of all time. It was used in anything and everything and can still be found in new devices today. Here there's a custom Sega video processor and the video RAM, a ROM that stores the BIOS we saw before and some boot code, another bit of RAM for the CPU, and I don't know what that is. This is an op-amp, I don't know what it does though. It is Samsung though, which is cool. I really expected this to have a Japanese motherboard with the FM sound stuff missing, but this is actually an exclusive motherboard just for the Korean units, and yet it has a place where a connector for an external power supply would be soldered. I'm kind of expecting, yeah, there's big long wires from here to the bottom of where that power supply connector should be. The motherboard does say made in Japan though. I wonder if some parts were made in Japan and others were made in Korea. They were definitely finished off in Korea. I've been trying to get some Sega card games working. I kind of came to the conclusion that perhaps the Samsung version had some weird lockout and it was incompatible with my cards. However, when I wiggle the card slot, it's pretty obvious that 2 of these connections aren't working properly. I'm pretty confident this thing will read cards once I've soldered this up. Yeah, there we go. Now I can shoot the spiky things. I should have known there'd be no region lock on this thing. They were pretty much depending on the import market to sell these systems. There weren't very many localized games sold. This sounds horrific. I don't like this noise at all. What am I doing? The noises have gotten worse. But let's not forget the glaringly obvious fact that this is a Gam Boy. It's so close to being called a Game Boy. It's not really known what Nintendo thought of this, but the Game Boy wasn't out when this came out, and after the Game Boy came out in Korea, this guy got renamed to Aladdin Boy. So yeah, maybe they had a word. And there you go, the Samsung Gam Boy. It's a weird Sega Master System.